Bob Blaskowitz is an associate professor of critical thinking and first-year studies at Stockton University, where he teaches courses on critical thinking, conspiracy theory, science and pseudoscience, science writing, and the literature of World War II combat veterans. He is a conspiracy guy blogger at the CFI website and a podcaster at Skepticality, which is the official podcast of Skeptic Magazine. And he is also an occasional contributor to the Skeptical Inquirer magazine. And today's talk should be very interesting about a very colorful character. So with that, I present Bob Blaskowitz.
Bob, you're muted.
There we go. Hello, how are you doing? Thank you all very much for having me come talk to you. This has been a great chance for me to put together some thoughts that I've had over the last several months as I've looked into this guy by the name of Yellowstone Kit. And I know that the people who show up for a humanist meeting don't need to be told to vote, but please do. Okay, so let me share my screen really quick. And share and run the slideshow. So on June 21st, 1910, in a New Orleans boarding house, a man by the name of George Edwin Wilson, age 60, was found dead in his bed by his landlord. In his room, reported the New York Times Democrat, was a large trunk full of his personal effects. Wilson's lonely death in a rented room would probably have been of little note if it weren't for his previous career and fame that he'd had across the South in the 1880s and 1890s under another name, Yellowstone Kit. Yellowstone Kit was a member of profession now long abandoned, the traveling medicine show. Oh, hold on, I have to hit the right button. There we go. The traveling medicine show. Though that's not to say that the peddling of fake medicines by dubious methods linked to entertainment has gone away. Yellowstone Kit was a successful practitioner during the medicine show's heyday. What's known about him, and this was a real challenge, is largely of his own invention and uncorroborated. I've spent a good portion of the last several months trying to pin him down and figure out who was this guy, and it wasn't easy. In one version of his life story, which appeared in the Times Democrat, he was a child of the Bayou, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a Southern man through and through. At age 9, he went west to prospect with his father, but when the Civil War broke out, his father and brothers returned to New Orleans to join up, and all three died in battle. Left in the care of a friend, Kit was raised among military men and Indians. He said, where, quote, in a peculiar way, and I take this writing to be him speaking in the third person. This is from something that was published. It's clear that he's the one authoring his press. But yeah, so in a peculiar way, he magnetized and fascinated men, women, and children. His influence over them, even when he was a mere boy, was phenomenal. In this account, Kit has a spectacular prospecting claim and is able to dig out gold of the ground at will. He loses fortunes in the stock market, and then he recovers them from his mine. The tale in that paper is one of a beneficent, generous man of fabulous wealth who crusades on the side of labor. These beginnings are completely omitted in a pamphlet that he published earlier that same year. In the book, Yellowstone Kit, The Marvel Worker, Life and Incidents. The unnamed author, who I also take to be Kit, says, we are unable to give a biographical sketch, an entire biographical sketch of Yellowstone Kit. Mystery surrounds and envelops his birth, early life, and parentage, like incense about a peace offering of Judea. As a young man, the pamphlet claims Kit was not like other people, or as he put it, It took but a short time for this sagacious man to discover that a power greater than that given to ordinary mortals was vested in him. End quote. He was imbued with some sort of power, he said, quote, during terrible storms in the mountains where the lightning plays about peak and crag, Kit would stand out and literally be enveloped with the fluid electricity that filled the surcharged atmosphere. It was then he felt the flow and ebb of a curious current of wondrous power through each nerve and pulsating artery of his body. As he stood amidst the thunderous crash, the lightning's play, childhood dreams of healing the multitudes by his touch came back to him. For an instant, he was faint with emotion. There it was, the vitality, the gift, the power, thrilling his form, slight, yet in perfect health. Intuitively, it came to this man that his dream was to be realized. There was no doubting this wondrous magnetism, electricity, life-giving power that so readily responded to the awe-inspiring essence in the air around him. He intended to put his efforts to the most crucial of all tests, actual practical proof. I love that scene. So what is this newly minted medical magneto to do? Well, go to Sacramento, of course. There he effects his first cure on a child with a lame leg. He rubs he finds the kid like lying in a gutter, and he goes up and he rubs the limb vigorously. Quote, Kit suddenly cried, walk, walk. And the child started to her feet, healed, brought back to the best of all gifts, health and strength to walk, to play and be as other children. Maybe the readers can imagine the joy, the trembling tenderness of that worn, tired mother in her bitter, poverty-stricken house. Kit could lay on the pathos pretty thick. Kit found it upsetting in this pamphlet that he could not impart his healing touch to other people. So he becomes a medicine seller. Luckily, while in San Francisco, he comes across a sailor who has been stabbed in the street. He saves the sailor's life and tells him about his mission to heal people. Quote, Kit knew, he felt that somewhere in nature's domains was a thing of plant life, a tree, a shrub, a flower, a petal perhaps, that possessed the power of healing all diseases. It must be so. Was it not part of nature's plan that it should give to the children of Adam that which they could use to heal? So the Greek sailor that he rescued tells Kit that during his travels in the Orient, he has encountered the remedy that Kit seeks and agrees to show it to him. Kit travels to India where he encounters the, there we go. He encounters the sacred pipal tree, a species of fig tree under which the Buddha gained enlightenment. Only 10 white people have ever seen it, he claims. And a drop of a preparation made from its heart-shaped leaves is enough to cure. He claims to have visited Japan to sample unopened flowers of coconuts. Japan had only recently opened up to the wider world, maybe 30 years earlier, and it evoked a sense of exoticism and mystery. While there, and in this curious land, quote, Kit found a valuable helper in his work in the person of Yaso Miyaka, the nephew of the third prince of the Order of the Lizard, the grandson of the Mas Na Kin, or Chancellor of the Treasury, as the title would be in Europe. This grandee supposedly helped him find the Momoa tree, which allowed him to formulate his cure. He eventually returned to the States where he used his newfound knowledge to turn American herbs into a medicine. This would become his Japanese herb pad. And one thing that occurs to me, there may be some archaic language about race here that I'm going to quote, but I'm not going to use the big bad, just to be safe. So this origin story is different from another version of Kit's life that's put out there, which sometimes appears in the press, that he was a scout for the army in the West. Kit claimed that he was only 20 miles away from Little Bighorn working as an army scout when General Custer died. Kit said that Custer had been allowed to die and that he could have been rescued. Being a former army scout was apparently such a common backstory used by medical impresarios and pitchmen that skeptical newspapermen often wondered when discussing the medicine show phenomena, how many scouts did the army need? So what's the real story here? According to his Masonic membership card, George Edwin Grant was born in Boston on the 13th of May, 1850. He was the son of English immigrants, John Grant and Annie Elizabeth Canning, and he was one of 6 children. One of his sisters, according to census records, was deaf and mute. And that's kind of what we know about him and his family. We know a little bit more about his brother, but that really doesn't kind of enter into it. They're much older. We also know at some point, George Grant had his name legally changed to Yellowstone Kit. It appears in all the legal documents, and there are a lot of lawsuits that he's involved in, and it's always his Yellowstone Kit. We only know that he changed his name officially because he changed it back to Grant in December of 1892 after his retirement from the show. The name Yellowstone Kit first appears in print in Fort Benton, Montana in early January 1881. And for someone who left a comparatively small official document trail, it's possible using modern databases to track the movements of individuals through the West in surprisingly high detail. I was really surprised by this. As the newspapers of the day, many of which have been digitized, often printed rail and steamship passenger manifests, as well as the registries of local hotels. So this is one, Yellowstone Kit coming in from Denver is at the Overland Hotel. So by this means, we can see that he traveled to Montana from Denver, and after several months in Montana, he went to Reno and made his way to California by the end of '81. These registers are also how we know that he wasn't traveling alone, because if you see right here, there's a Dr. Pratt. This is P. Pratt is the other way you see his name, is always with him whenever he shows up in one of these registries or on one of these steamers. I haven't found much about Pratt and his relationship to Kit. It would not be strange for medicine men to travel in pairs. Small shows could be down to 2 people and a horse and a wagon. But you could also get really big professional shows at the heyday that got up to 60 people or more. In the memoir of Violet McNeil, one of the few female medicine pitch people, aka Princess Lotus Blossom, and in the Pipes for Pitchmen column of Billboard magazine, it's clear that the world of the medicine show was this vast network of acquaintances, a whole subculture not unlike that of the circus. Kit and Pratt's presentation seems to have been firmly in the genre of the Indian doctor. Kit was in Stockton, California in September of '81. And it's the first time that Kit was described in the papers plying his trade. Even at this early date, Kit appears to be a fully fleshed out character with a backstory. And I do kind of treat him like a character that can be passed on to someone. Yellowstone Kit, a slender man with long hair dressed in the Buffalo Bill style and displaying 3 yards of watch chain from his leather belt, stood in a carriage on the opposite corner as aide de camp to a jolly fat man. A jolly fat man who was extolling the merits of Yellowstone Kit's new Indian remedy, Hokey Pokey, warranted to cure all diseases known to the human family by its subtle and mysterious action upon the kidneys, liver, and lungs. In order to make his address interesting, he exhibited a 2-foot Bowie knife with which Kit had slaughtered an immense grizzly in the Yellowstone country after Kit had 3 ribs and an arm broken. There were 500 people around his carriage at one time last night, and sales were correspondingly brisk. So, a couple of notes about this. The unnecessarily ostentatious gold watch chain hits at another feature of Kit's personality and persona. And it's the phrase, nothing succeeds like success. And you see this across the medical vendor spectrum, that people are always wearing diamonds and bragging about wealth. He does that too. He stays in the most luxurious hotels. The reporter for the Mail here also helpfully identifies the inspiration behind the success of Indian-themed medicine shows. And that is who we mentioned before, Buffalo Bill Cody, who has fantastic boots. Yeah. So Buffalo Bill was a symbol of heroism, daring do, and manliness in the American mind, thanks to a number of popular novels which dramatized his exploits as a scout and borderman. By the time Cody started his own famous Wild West show in 1883, Western-themed medicine shows were already crisscrossing the country, helmed by such characters as Yellowstone Kit. Chief among these shows was the Kickapoo Medicine Company, which was established in the same year that Kit appeared in Montana in 1881. The two principals of this company, Charles Bigelow and John Healy, and I have here actually a bottle from Healy and Bigelow. The two principals were experienced traveling men by the time they struck up the idea of a brew that they called Indian Sagwa. Bigelow, as a young man in Texas, and this is interesting, had started his career working with a bogus Indian medicine man named Phil Grant, AKA Dr. Yellowstone. I can't say that this is Kit. The pairing of the names Yellowstone and Grant is quite suggestive to me, especially since it was told, the story is told about Bigelow by someone else who may not have the story right, but nonetheless, it could have been somebody else. So many of these characters were variations on a theme. Take, for example, Charles Bigelow, who through his association with this Dr. Yellowstone had become Texas Charlie. The Kickapoo idea, as Brooks McNamara put it, was to bring some natives on the road who would brew sagwa in the background, or in a teepee when the show wasn't on. So they'd brew on stage or at the Indian camp. And you can see here behind the little stage that there's a teepee on one side and what looks like a tent, which would probably have been like where the agents or white people were counting the money. But so as this goes, the natives would perform traditional dances and ceremonies while the medicine man posed as Indian agents who were merely bottling the sagwa for the Kickapoo. Only the Kickapoo knew the whole recipe because there was a special element in it which allowed it to defy chemical analysis. The problem with this is that all of it was bunk, right? Sagwa was a word that Healy and Bigelow invented. There were no Kickapoo in the show or associated with the enterprise in any way. And one or two of the natives were in fact natives of Ireland. So yeah, other than that, it was completely above board. So by packing their shows and Indian campings with artifacts and natives, Healy and Bigelow could sell the show as being a sort of authentic experience, right? Educational experience. And that was important because the medicine show had some credibility and respectability problems. Acting and performing has always been a little bit suspect. Ask the parents of, anyone whose kid says that they're going to be a drama major, but that feeling has abated since the 19th century, when it was a much stronger and more explicit kind of explicitly disproved. In the first half of the 19th century, for instance, theaters could be rowdy. They sold alcohol. There were places where you might find a prostitute in the boxes. There is a rich literature in the American tradition of the depredations visited upon the lowly chorus girl, right? Secondly, they were selling remedies that didn't work. Traveling shows, especially some smaller ones, were widely seen as taking sales away from local pharmacists, and that these vendors were removing money from the local economy. The shows might be loud. They might obstruct traffic. This is one from the 30s. And you can see there, that there is the customary blackface act, which was minstrel act was always part of a medicine show. It was an incredibly popular part of the American entertainment diet. So to compensate for this reputation that the medicine show had, the showman put on a variety of guises to convince people that they were trustworthy. A popular one was that of the Quaker doctor, in which quacks would don the traditional garb of Quakers and speak using the sex characteristics these and thous to capitalize on their reputed trustworthiness. A different tack was taken by the Hamlin Oil Company, Hamlin Wizard Oil Company, who deployed entertainment teams to promote Hamlin's Wizard Oil. John Hamlin, the company's co-founder, innovated by mass producing respectable touring shows. He set strict guidelines for dress and behavior for his touring companies. Every sales unit was uniform. A 4 to 6 horse carriage that expanded into a stage with a driver, a lecturer, and a 4-piece brass band that also sang. You knew what you were getting when a Hamlin show rolled into town. These groups also primarily stocked pharmacy shelves with products, with the liver pills, with the cough remedies, and their liniment. They generated interest in the product by holding their public shows. Also, the band's services were donated to charity fundraisers and church choirs. And as a result, the shows were generally welcomed by most communities. When Kit's troupe grew larger, he started loaning out his performers to worthy causes and expanded on the idea of conspicuous charity as a mode of garnering the favor of local communities. The medicine show, in some ways, invented a number of business and entertainment practices that we take for granted today. I think the most interesting of these is the format. In Kit's case, he would only sell his medicine for a minute at a time. This would be in between acts. And that sets up a very, he would stand there with his, his pocket watch out, timing the sales, and clap to close at a minute, no matter how many hands with dollars were up. He refused to sell until after the next act. This is a preview of the modern advertisement arrangement of network television, where you get some free entertainment, then they sell you some stuff, and then you go back to the show. And there's never a moment when there's not someone on stage doing something. Additionally, many of the skits and characters that originated in the medicine show followed the actors who got their start in the medicine show, went on to vaudeville, went on to the movies, went to radio, and eventually onto television. The medicine show is kind of where it's, and the medicine show is probably the most important provider of entertainment to rural communities, because they're the only thing that people, the only entertainment that would travel out there. Between 1881 and 1883, Kit appears to be touring an Indian show, mostly in California. He's described by an Oroville, California paper as an old government scout who appears nightly with a, quote, full banjo and a soloist of rare powers of vocalization who pleases the crowd with interludes so that they may not tire of the abstruse medical lectures of Yellowstone Kit when he expatiates upon the virtues of his Indian herb pad and his hokey pokey, the Indian cure for rheumatism. This Indian herb pad is what was called a liver pad. Here's an example of a competitor's liver pad modeled by sexy Abraham Lincoln. This is an 1876 advertisement. These pads worn against the body would be, they could be filled with literally grass, sawdust, anything. And they would be coated with a glue that had chili powder or capsicum in it. And when the glue melted at body temperature, it would give the person a warm sensation that something was working, right? Medicine men at this time were theater managers, especially when their shows got very large. And they kept their their act lively and engaged. Boy, I just entirely lost my page. They kept their performances lively and varied because they had to sell medicine at the same location for many days in a row. Performers had multiple specialties and roles in the show. They often worked within a common set of entertainment traditions. That is to say, they all knew the same comedic and dramatic sketches. They all knew the same songs and so on. The entertainers often had huge repertoires, and they could be integrated into any traveling company very easily. And now I'm going to my blank slide here. In November of '83, Kit's show had an extended run in San Francisco. And it's at this time that he starts kind of taking charge of his own press. He starts authoring or purchasing most of his press coverage. It's grown beyond 2 people in a carriage. The San Francisco Examiner reports, quote, "If you want to see Indian camp life in all its grandeur, go to Yellowstone Kit's Indian Wigwam, where Yellowstone Kit and his band of Indians open tonight. It is also a magnificent panorama. There's also a magnificent panorama of National Yellowstone Park and Firehole Basin on exhibition and many other novel attractions." The full name of the show is Yellowstone Kit's Wigwam and Tapawa Camp. They are, quote, "giving genuine Indian dances and manufacturing their medicines," kind of like the Kickapoo show. And in fact, it looks like they're claiming that they have a Kickapoo medicine by the name of Machutaga, a modern Asclepius, whose great blood purifier, Tapawa, rivals the work of his ancient prototype. It sells for $1 a bottle. In '84, Kit starts moving east through Arizona and Utah. That year, while at Salt Lake City, Kit financially bails out and then takes possession of the Silver Plate Circus. In exchange for a loan to keep it afloat until the end of the season, the circus and all its possessions are collateral, and Kit collects. So his show is growing. In 1886, at the beginning of the year, Kit was in San Antonio, Texas during a smallpox outbreak, and the police forbade him from selling his medicine on the plaza for fear of spreading the disease. And this measure was not without cause. A rival medicine man by the name of J.I. Lighthall, better known as the Diamond King, contracted smallpox after contracting it after giving a show at his wagon on the plaza. He died in his camp, and then Kit bought the assets of the rival before moving on. On his next stop to Austin, we first hear the name of somebody who travels with Kit for years, a guy by the name of Herb Norman. And I love the description here. The third son of a ruling prince of Spain, undoubtedly the most wonderful man of the century. He is, it's claimed that he's performed for Queen Victoria 3 times and other crowned heads of Europe. He's a contortionist who does a trick in which he, quote, breaks his neck and throws it around the stage. And he can pull his body through what I imagine was an unreasonably small metal ring. Kit is also at this time still selling his Indian pad. He starts traveling with, he soon starts traveling with and advertising his Japanese troupe. And a Japanese couple, the Yasos, a husband who's a juggler and the wife a singer, are traveling with him. At the same time, a notice probably written by Kit or his business manager says that he has a reputation as a, quote, traveling philanthropist, that he was a scout for 11 years and learned his trade from Indians. These notices are basically indistinguishable from the news in the paper, except for the, well, including the profuse and uncritical praise Kit gets in the paper. So there's something suspicious going on there, right? They're not advertising sponsored content. So yeah, Kit travels from Texas to Little Rock to Memphis, where we hear that he's touring with, and this is one of those antiquated racial terms, he's touring with a little Jap. This person is Hamiakari Umekichi, better known as Little All Right. Little All Right had been a genuine sensation in his childhood. After Japan opened up, he was part of the very first Japanese acrobats to tour America and Europe. He got his name because after every stunt or trick that he did, he punctuated it with a "all right," and so he became little "all right." There is, and this is him, and then this is him at the top of a bunch of baskets. I imagine he's going to land on his father's feet. That's my guess here. But yeah, at this point in his career, Little All Right is a magician and comedian who has a monkey and trained pigeon act. It's also in Memphis that we see Kit adding charity days to his schedule. Now, he'd give 3 shows a day, but as an article says, quote, "One day in the week is devoted to the poor and no money is taken. This is Poor People's Day, and the streets and sidewalks in the vicinity of his headquarters were thronged with curious spectators as well as applicants for treatment." And by headquarters, they either mean the camp, or he would occasionally rent out an office and do more intensive treating there. He had a couple of doctors working for him. We start seeing Kit donating to charities and local civic causes here. At night, he entertains under electric lights, which was a big deal. It would have been a novelty in itself, and he closes the evenings with a fireworks show. In Georgia, Kit starts throwing money to crowds. His critics characterize this, and I think it's probably accurate, that he's collecting dollars and distributing dimes, right? He starts talking about his wealth all the time, that he says he possesses $300,000 in cash and real estate. But just a few years later, it's $3 million or more. He starts saying that the secret to his success was an herb which he secured after thousands of miles of travel and the expenditure of a large sum of money. The herb is spoken of in the scriptures, but for many centuries, its origin was lost, and when discovered, was only known to the titled physicians of Japan. So his Indian herb pad has now become a Japanese herb pad, right? A last acquisition he makes in Macon before he moves on is the services of what the Macon Telegraph calls the Colored Brass Band of Macon, which took some of the best, and here's another one of the words, Negro talent, out of the city for a while. Indeed, some members of the Bibb County Blues Band appeared to stay with him for the stretch. Some never returned. It's in Albany, Georgia, that we first get a sense that Kit is very popular among Blacks following a poorly thought out arrest of the medicine man on the part of the mayor. Kit had a license to sell in the city, but a petition was presented to the mayor by local businessmen who, quote, declared that Yellowstone Kit was playing upon the credulity of the ignorant and defrauding them of money, which would be taken away to the detriment of the community. The mayor agreed to revoke the license. After a 2-hour show, when the troupe began to sell medicine, the police arrested Kit, who went without a fuss. And then, according to the paper, quote, and this is quite a long quote, but it's interesting. The arrest had created quite a flutter in the crowd, and such exclamations, "He ain't done nothing," and "Hurrah for Kit," filled the air. The marshal and Kit descended the platform and walked off together, and the crowd followed. It soon became evident that Kit had the sympathy of the crowd, and hundreds of people followed him and the officer. At the Rialto Saloon, pardon me, the officer and his prisoner stepped inside with the evident hope of getting away from the crowd, but the crowd followed. In less than 5 minutes, the Rialto was packed as closely as men could stand, and soon a crowd of 400 or 500 had congregated in the street in front of the door Kit had entered. Seeing that he'd been followed by a crowd of sympathizers, Kit took his stand, planked down a $20 gold piece, and invited everybody to take something. Many accepted the invitation, and Kit planked down the cash for what they drank. It was a regular jubilee for Kit. Once the mayor consulted a judge and a lawyer, Kit was released and allowed to go back to his show. But it was a great bit of popularity for Kit. And it's my understanding in reading about these guys that they often capitalize on getting arrested. to use as evidence of how oppressed they were. It's hard to not think of someone like Alex Jones, who's currently using his defamation libel trials to promote himself over the last couple of weeks. After Georgia, Kit went to Florida. And in a dispatch from Key West that appeared in a Macon paper, a medicine man rivalry, and they weren't uncommon, it became violent. The other medicine man involved was someone named E.J. Garner, and his men seemed to have tried to ambush Kit while he was traveling by carriage. They jumped out, may have fired pistols at him. It's hard to say. Kit seems to have been hit with a brick and injured. He also claims to have pulled a pistol on them, but depending on which version of the story you read, the pistol either hung fired, had wet ammunition, or was a prop gun from a sketch that the show had done. The correspondent Macon says of Kit, quote, "He was laid up several days, but was not so sick, but what he was able to write a half-column letter denouncing Gardner as a scoundrel, cur, and bad citizen generally, which communication was published. Kit's letter is a spicy piece of literature. I would love to read that letter. And if I do follow-up research on this, I am going to Key West to find the original publication. I have to find this. At the end of the month, he makes national news from Jacksonville, Florida, where a paper writes, quote, "The Negroes of the city, as well as many whites, for some days have been in a terrible state of excitement over wonderful cures alleged to be effected by Yellowstone Kit, a medicine vendor. Thousands gather every night to hear him, and the Negroes declare him to be the second Messiah, and that he can cure any ill by anointing." The stories appears in various forms under the headline "A Negro Messiah" in papers around the country. And this is the version of Kit that caught my attention first. Quote, "So far, this man who travels under the grandiloquent name Yellowstone Kit worked upon these people that he lectures on them, their moral duties, voting, social conditions, rights, religious beliefs, and has created more furor among them than Sam Jones, a traveling preacher, ever created among Southern whites." Quote, "He's a man of slender build, dark, swarthy features, curling, kinking hair of raven blackness, piercing black eyes, and dresses very particularly, fairly blazing with genuine diamonds. The cast of his features and wild talk are partially responsible for the belief among the colored people that he is a messiah, as well as his alleged cures. He is alleged to have carried away $23,000 from Key West as the recompense for his arduous work of faith." And this article is reprinted around the country for a month. And his reputation is fixed as a man of lavish generosity and of miraculous cures and a force among Southern Blacks. One Vermont paper reports that on one of his charity days in Columbia, South Carolina, he gave away 1,500 loaves of bread, 2,000 cakes and crackers, 25 hams, 200 pounds of bacon, which is almost enough bacon, and 230 yards of calico and white cloth, as well as giving away $84 in cash to the destitute. And then he treated 760 people at his institute. So, and the institute might have the latest things. They had a gastroscope, so they could look at your stomach. I imagine that was unpleasant. They had an oxygen machine, whatever that does. Anyway, on October 6, 1887, he arrives in Atlanta, and Atlanta is important. They've been a buzz about him for a couple of weeks. When he gets there, he's arrested. And he had been expecting this because of a fight that had been brewing with yet another medicine man, a guy by the name of Dr. Wickers, who had another Indian show. Kit's agent, Frank Ellsworth, had worked ahead of Kit in printing up flyers and handbills and putting them around the city. And apparently some of those handbills had libelous statements about Wickers in them. And even though he was indicted by a grand jury, I can't find a copy of the text. And I've looked. I've talked to people in Atlanta, can't find it. The rival remained in the press because of continued confrontations between Wickers and Kit. Wickers would show up at his events and try to seize all of Kit's property and that sort of thing, which almost got him killed in a riot, but whatever. Anyway, so in the end, at the end of November, a jury was not able to agree on a guilty verdict, so there was a mistrial declared. The only person who was convicted was Ellsworth, his manager, and he was found guilty, ordered to pay $100 in costs. But the criminal trial, as sensational as it wasn't the most dramatic thing that happened to Kit during his visit to Atlanta. On November 23rd, Kit gets directly involved in local politics regarding a bill to rescind 2-year-old prohibition laws in Atlanta. Kit is a wet. He is anti-prohibition. The idea seems to be, on the part of the antis, to capitalize on Kit's popularity among the city's Black residents and turn them into a powerful voting bloc in favor of licensing saloons. The Atlanta Constitution at this time gives us a rare snippet of things that Kit said from the stage. Are there any mothers here? Quote, yes, there are, cried a number. Then listen, when there were bars, you knew where to find your boy. How is it now? Liquor is sold everywhere now. Can you find your boys? No, we can't, yelled an old negress. Then suppose barrooms are brought back like they were. Could you find them then if liquor was sold in saloons or barrooms instead of in alleys, streets, hallways, and everywhere? Or in saloons with doors open? Where could you find them with the least trouble? In the saloons, yelled a Negro. You are right, then remember it. And Kit retired. It strikes me as a fairly weak defense of liquor licensing to say at least you'll be able to find your incapacitated children, but there you are. Yeah, but apparently he held the crowd very well, right? The election was held on the 26th, and it's of national interest. Large crowds of Blacks that Kit had attracted became the focus of prognostication about the future of prohibition in the country. A widely published article proclaimed Kit to be the Moses of the antis and argued that, quote, the Negro is the balance of power in the elections. And so this was how the election was characterized around the country. A prohibitionist author wrote in the Indianapolis Journal, quote, it was hoped that the election would be devoid of the sensational features of the first one, the one 2 years earlier. That such is not the case, but that more disgraceful methods than before are adopted for influencing voters, is indicated by reports from Atlanta. When governors, senators, judges, and other prominent men of both parties, dry and wet, struggled to secure the influence of a quack medicine peddler who is popular among the Negroes, the spectacle is one from which self-respecting men and women must turn from with disgust, patooey, right? The author also alleges, without evidence, that he took $5,000 to support the cause. On election day, Kit made a number of speeches around the city and was followed by large crowds. The Tennessean reports that the, quote, most important figure, at least during the last few days, has been Yellowstone Kit. And who is Yellowstone Kit? A genius, if the great and glorious country ever produced one. He is a medicine man, king of the fakers. He came to Atlanta about 3 months ago and has almost absolute power over the Negroes of the city. They worship him, adore him. And as a barber said tonight, there are 2,000 Negroes in Atlanta tonight who would die fighting for Kit. I haven't seen this in the Black press. And I suspect that this sort of rhetoric is meant to take away Black agency. There's a conspiracy theory of Northern whites, Jews taking over, controlling Blacks, on the matter of civil rights and that sort of thing. This may be an early manifestation of that particular conspiracy theory. On the 27th of November, oh, that's a little all right. There was an announcement, Atlanta goes wet. The anti-prohibitionists win by 1,122 votes. Kit is given a lot of credit for this, and there's no doubt that for that whole week, he spoke in front of thousands of people several times a day. The celebration among the Wets is large, and much of it takes place at the old Kimball House Hotel, the most luxurious place in the city. And Kit made it known that he was staying in the presidential suite, right? Following the election, Kit became a lightning rod for controversy, and it seems to have worn down on him pretty rapidly. He seems to get arrested a lot more often. The reasons for this are not simply his politicking against prohibition, although I think that has something to do with it. I think because it was drawing attention to what he was saying. But Southern cities and states were enacting tougher laws and higher licensing fees for medicine vendors at the time, partly because of the influence of people like Kit. And he found himself often in a gray legal area as a test case for these various laws. In Montgomery, Alabama, he was arrested for peddling without a license. Kit protested that he wasn't a peddler in any meaningful sense. He rented a spot. He worked from a tent. He did not sell on a street. Kit protested the fine and took it to the Alabama Supreme Court, and he won. In another Alabama case, Kit was arrested in Birmingham for a warrant in Mobile on the charge of running a lottery. He posted bond, but was eventually convicted and fined $1,000. He again appealed. One of the promotional tactics that medicine vendors used to bring people in was to hold raffles and popularity contests and giveaways and that sort of thing. And this is what got Kit in trouble in Mobile. The legal precedent may be his most enduring legacy. The facts when they were argued in court were this: Kit owned a tent where he sold medicines. Everyone who entered the tent was given a ticket, which gave them a chance to win a watch or diamond ring. His defense was that it was benevolence on his part, not part of his business. He was found guilty in the original trial and issued a large fine, which was appealed. Okay, so 2 months later, when the Alabama Supreme Court ruled on the case, they found there was a charge for seating, but not for entrance into the tent, as there was always standing room. For this reason, they ruled, quote, "We can see nothing in the evidence from which it can be inferred that anyone present or absent paid any valuable consideration, directly or indirectly, for these tickets or for the chance of getting a prize. Because that paying for a small chance to win is the behavior anti-lottery laws were designed to prohibit, no law was broken." And so the court said that there was no prohibition whatsoever on weird or eccentric acts of charity. And this is why whenever you go to Monopoly at McDonald's during Monopoly season, there's always that little no purchase necessary disclaimer, and an option to get a piece for free. I think that ruling has subsequently been replaced with something else, but in the 1940s, Charles Reznikoff rediscovered Kit in his book Testimony, the United States 1885 to 1915. This was a book of poems that was inspired by court records of the era, and they're all really dark, people doing horrible things and it showing up in court. Kit appears in the sequence of poems early on, Social Life. Yellowstone Kit, as he was called, would come to Montgomery now and then and rent a lot, put up a large tent in which he placed a stand and a number of seats around it, and electric lights to light up the tent at night. In the tent, he gave exhibitions of sleight of hand and lectures on the merits of his drugs for sale, handing them around himself or by his helpers. And at these exhibitions, there was always music by a band. So, I think the real reason that Kit had so many problems after the election in Atlanta was the influence that he had over Black citizens. In Shreveport, Louisiana, Kit starts to raise a ruckus by speaking on the matter of social conditions. The Shreveport Times says that though it champions the honest working man, quote, "The Times is not prepared to dispute the merit of the pads or the medicine sold by Yellowstone Kit under a license issued by the proper authorities, but the Times must say that if Yellowstone Kit cannot conduct his business without referring to social lines and conditions or refer to people or classes that will result in an antagonism, he should fold his tent and quit." Kit was not flattered by this coverage and escalated the attacks on editors of the local papers. And the papers reported that Kit was subsequently arrested for violating a new law, Act 118 of the last legislature, a criminal libel law, with a fine of up to $1,000 or 2 years in prison. Kit's arrest, according to the Times, created consternation among the Negroes who had lingered around the tent after the close of the performance. The crowd increased until the number ran into the thousands. Kit was followed to the courthouse by hundreds of Negroes, which number was made greater afterwards. The vast concourse of Negroes around the courthouse was somewhat a reminder of the days in Louisiana's darkest hour. I'm going to guess it has something to do very specific with the Civil War and Black people getting the franchise, perhaps. This show of solidarity with Kit seems to really rattle the editors. Quote, "The scenes of yesterday must not be repeated. There's a great danger in the gathering under the circumstances of an irresponsible class on the streets whose passion can be too easily roused," said the easily roused passions of the editor, but whatever. They reported Kit's lectures to be, quote, "anarchist doctrines." One of the objections they raised is that his teachings and influence have already demoralized labor and is viewed as a nuisance by all thoughtful and considerate citizens. From a reprinted article of the Shreveport Democrat, whose editor was one of the ones who was allegedly defamed, we get a sense of what Kit was saying. He was saying, but he may, quote, "Maybe he may humbug the Negroes as much as he pleases, but when he attempts by incendiary speeches to array them against the white people, when he tells them that they are just as good as the white man and ought to assert their rights, that they are fools for working for men who habitually swindle them out of their wages and expressions of a like nature, he may think he's within the written law of the land, but we tell him in all kindness that he taxes too much the patience of a law-abiding people. The white men of Caddo Parish have had to deal in the past with just such contingencies as that which confronts them now, and they have acted promptly and effectively. And this is without resort to mob law, which is not justifiable, not even in this case. And it's the possibility of mob violence against Kit, which over and over, that is constantly decried, which suggests to me that this is, you know, a dog whistle. A lot of apophasis, the "I'm not saying, I'm just saying" approach to argument. I won't mention my opponent's many alleged, the rumors of his alleged affairs. I would rather focus on the issues, but you just mentioned them. That's kind of what's going on. They're just dropping hints here. It's a veiled threat. Kit was acquitted because there was only a single witness for the prosecution. He had half a dozen people who said that they hadn't heard anything defamatory. But most of the coverage was was not related to the supposed libel, slander, whatever. There's a difference. I don't know what it is. But one paper notes that because Kit is apparently untouchable, at least by the law, extra legal means are being considered, and that, quote, "white cap notices are pouring in on him, warning him to leave town." And a white cap notice was basically an anonymous threat, a political threat. Someone also tried to burn down the lodgings of a number of Black laborers who had come to the show to the city to see Kit's show. So we're starting to, you know, we're seeing violence start to bubble up, and Kit leaves town. Was he a genuine hero of the Black man, or, you know, the Black cause or Black equality? I mean, I find it hard to settle on that, you know, to conclude that. He was primarily scamming Black audiences. He was also exceedingly cruel, it seems. I mean, the number of times that he pulls out a pistol is more than your normal doctor, I think. And a reporter for the Lexington Herald Leader, who was covering the jail in which Kit had been previously held, encountered a distraught Black woman by the name of Nellie Crawford, who had been detained. She said that when Kit had passed through Louisville a few weeks earlier, Crawford's mother, a poor washerwoman, had sold some of her belongings in order to go to Kit's tent and have a tapeworm removed. According to Crawford's account, quote, "He said he would do it for $11. My mother sent me here to get her money back because he left for Louisville, for Lexington, without treating her. She told me to tell him if he would not give it all to me, to please give me $2.40 to pay for my fare back home. When she found him at his tent, he told her to leave or be arrested. She was in the process of trying to find a job when a private police officer working for Kit arrested her for vagrancy." So he seems to have been nasty. He spent a lot of time in Texas during the early 1890s, and it's likely at this time he had his portrait taken. This is the only photograph of Kit I was able to find. And I think it's a real, I think it's genuinely important. It's in the collection of the Tarrant County Library in Texas, and it's a part of a collection related to theatrical memorabilia, cards and playbills and that sort of thing. In 1892, Kit retired from the medicine show to focus on his land holdings. And over the years, as he was touring the South, he was always talking about how he's buying land. And there's some evidence for it. He says that he holds valuable property in Fort Worth and Dallas, New Orleans, Atlanta, and Brunswick, Georgia, Jacksonville, Savannah, and considerable iron ore land in Alabama. The disposition, ultimate fate of these properties is unknown. At one point, he planned building or said that he planned to build a medical resort in Florida. That never happened. The show goes on, and it seems to be based in Texas, but it's unclear whether or not someone has taken over the role of Kit, or if Kit sometimes actually shows up. And it seems that he sometimes does, because he goes and he speaks on the same issues. I think it's him. But he only appears there intermittently. He largely disappears from view until his death in 1910. And at this point, the contrast between his previous condition when he left the public stage and his rather anonymous demise in a rented room in the French Quarter, it led to much speculation about how Kit lost his money. There is a thread of gambling in his background. I don't know if that had something to do with it. He's a land speculator. He speculates in the stock market. He says, as one of his backstories, that he lost a lot of money in a stock market. So that's a recurring theme. That's a possibility. I've been unable to find his will, but it seems that one of his brothers, a bank clerk in Boston, collected his body and returned him home for burial. And that's what I got. So are there questions? Are there answers? That would be great.
Thank you. Very interesting story. There are a couple questions in the chat.
Cool.
Andy wrote, what were the finances of a medicine show? You said sold for $1 bottle. How many would they sell on an average stop? What were the performers paid? Did they charge admission?
Yeah. So there were a number of different financing schemes on the part. Some of the shows, they just, made money just from what they sold. Other professional groups, they'd have contracts with, they'd have contracted acts. You could buy the contract of an act when the circus went out of business, and they would start touring with you. A lot of the bigger ones were representing another company. So Hamlin's Wizard Oil, for instance, the people would go around and they'd be paid basically to stock the shelves of local pharmacies and promote it. So they also could sell tickets. A number did. So there was a variety of different. And if you were going to sell tickets, I mean, you needed to constantly change up your game in order to have people coming in, so you see a lot of swapping of acts, a lot of changes in the offerings from night to night, that sort of thing. But some people could become extremely wealthy. Some of them even went into legitimate theater, like bought theaters and opera houses and started producing shows like that. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Jim asked, do you see a connection between the medicine shows and today's dietary supplements that have no scientific evidence of effectiveness?
They are the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there is that. There's the kind of the fuzzy wuzzy idea that something that occurs in nature is good for you, for instance, like Indians, right? They become like the children of the forest who have the secret knowledge of health, right? So that seems to be kind of an appeal to nature that's often seen in the selling of vitamin supplements. The fact that there could literally be frickin' anything in what they're selling is also a feature of the modern supplement market. So yeah, I mean, they're unregulated wild west of fake health.
So Jim also added, as a sequel to his previous question, have those medicine shows led to today's televangelist?
They are part of the same thing. They didn't lead you. They're part of the same kind of revival spirit. And, you know, you would have, you know, people talking about, like, Kit may have done some faith healing. I don't see them saying that explicitly. People are attributing it to him, but I don't see it coming from him. You have, you know, there's that comparison between Sam Jones and Yellowstone Kit, is who's having the bigger influence. You at times see Kit renting out his 1,000-seater tent to revivals. So I think they're very similar, and they're very often religious and themes in these talks, it sounds like. So it does sound like there is some preaching too. There's some crossover, and he's got the thing that'll heal you, you know, just like Jesus. You know, he's the cure for your original sin or your dyspepsia.
So Eric thought that was a good connection. Eugene asked, and I often wondered about it too, when hokey pokey came up a lot. So what did it mean in those days as today when it's a dance for children?
Yeah, it was a type of poker that was often banned because of his association with gambling.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a heck of a thing.
So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you know, when he changed the name to Tapawa, it had more of the air of being a native remedy, like sagwa, you know, as opposed to hokey pokey. So yeah, that's what I know about that.
So Eric asked, who were in his audiences? Mostly men, women?
Yes, it was mixed race, but they were segregated, right? So that you had a black area and you had the area for the whites. And depending on the venue, one of his excuses for, when he's talking about how his business is set up in front of the courts, he says that he doesn't sell, they sell tickets for seating, right? But you don't have to buy. He also says that part of the business isn't him. That's somebody else who does that. And it's just for the ladies. You know, it's done at the, you know, he allows it because of the comfort of the ladies. He says he'd rather not have it because the people who sit down, pay to sit down, don't buy medicine, you know? Yeah, so it was mixed both by sex and race, it seems.
So I don't see any other questions, but I have just an observation.
Sure.
Bob, it seems to me your description of Yellowstone Kit and his ilk and compatriots of the time, I see a lot of comparisons or connections with the showmanship antics of our former president in terms of selling a story that is
nothing succeeds like success.
Yes, and you know, the idea of trapped in, you know, I have all the trappings of power and wealth, so I must be wealthy.
Yellowstone Kit and Donald Trump are a poor person's idea of what a wealthy person is like. You know, like that ostentatious. There is a and I'm sorry if I offend anyone. I think the former president's a sociopath. Does not care about the well-being of other people. Kit, as much as he proclaims, I think he's a smarter sociopath than Trump. The way he treats that girl who wanted a refund, the way he ran off with her money, you know, sounds like, in a small scale, what Trump was doing to Atlantic City. You know, running up charges and then not you know. They also have persecution complexes. That's very true. I guess when your view of the world doesn't live up to your expectations, it must seem like everyone is out to get you. So when you're wrong about everything, everyone's out to get you. With Kit, he explains hostility to his quack treatments and his rivalries as being jealousy, as being conspiratorial. And that's a useful dodge. And you see that in modern quackery as well, where, I don't know, hydroxychloroquine or whatever, they want to give you the vaccine instead because they make money when you get myocarditis because of reason somehow. You know, like you see that kind of conspiratorial thinking in alt med. Yeah.
Okay, Carol had a comment. Do you see the connection between the advertising of the day dime novels and jingoistic? And I didn't get the last word there. I got to pull it back up.
The jingoistic articles.
Jingoistic in newspapers, they are all examples of sensationalism.
Yeah, there's a lot of shouting for attention. I think that this isn't my area, but I suspect that the mass literacy had something to do with this. That the cheapness of print made it profitable, and what you see in these patent medicine vendors and patent medicine companies in general was an extensive control over what was going into the newspapers. There was something that was called a red line clause that was kind of a standard among the proprietary medicines association members. And what that was is a clause. It's when a small newspaper might get 50% of its advertising from fake medicines, right? If you look at these old papers, there's a lot of, you know, they're curing rheumatism and gout and all sorts of things everywhere. So half of their revenue may have come from that advertising. And they would put into their contracts that if any legislation unfavorable to the interests of the proprietary vendors was enacted, that the contract would become null and void. So when a reform bill came up in the legislature, the state legislature, well, the newspapers were against it, you know? So yeah, so there, and then there also wasn't necessarily the same type of objective standard that is aspired to in the, and there was a lot more competition between newspapers as well at the time. That may have raised the temperature a little bit, but we seem to be pretty good at being divisive ourselves now.
Yes, we are. I don't see, oh, here's one more here. Eric added, collecting dollars, distributing dimes, puts charity under sharper light. Could you talk a bit about today's charity?
Oh boy, I'm not as, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if you look at I think the Red Cross has come under fire in recent years for spending a lot of its money on advertising itself, and a lot of money on raising money rather than, you know, funding charitable acts. I think that is a worry, but I'm not as familiar. I think St. Jude recently was the subject of big questioning about how much they promote themselves versus how much goes into, you know, if a third of their budget or whatever it is going to advertising. Could they be doing a lot more? You know,
so it's the numbers game, and how do you parse that, and what is the right balance?
Right.
It's like,
yeah, I mean, there's going to be overhead.
Yeah, there is, and it's how do you find the right balance?
Yeah. So, but I thought that the collecting dollar, because it sounds like he's just giving huge amounts of cash away, but when you consider, you know, he's selling 5 different types of things, you know, he's selling liver pads and hair oil and rheumatism cures, and you know, and he even does get into the state. He reaches that lofty sphere where he starts recruiting agents to sell his medicines when he's not in town, and you know, he has official brokers, we're looking for pharmacists, right?
Mhm.
Who stock his stuff and advertise his stuff after he's left town. It sounds like that his medicines are coming from elsewhere. We don't have his business records, but that wouldn't be uncommon, that they would be manufactured elsewhere and they'd be shipped via rail to the towns. Where
Well,
they're-
but, you know, thinking about, for example, is there any information on dissatisfaction when his products, when they didn't work?
I haven't seen much, honestly. You just see it in that one case with Nellie and her mom. There's just said when just getting ripped off. But no, and that's a lot of that is because, well, two reasons. Kit is writing a lot of the press for himself at a dime a line, and people who are swindled don't like to advertise that they've been swindled. And so people are generally reticent unless they have some clout. They seem to not retaliate.
Understand. But it struck me too when talking about a dollar a bottle in the 1890s. A dollar in today's terms would be, I'm afraid to guess, probably on the order of 15, at least 20 bucks.
Yeah, something like that. And we're talking about people who are in socioeconomic difficulty paying for this stuff too. It's taking money from people who may not have the money to spend, which is weird. When you look at the criticisms from the newspapers, is one of the things that Kit was apparently saying is like, don't pay your rent until they give you a decent place to live. And they're saying, well, these people don't have the money to spend on maybe you should pay attention. It's almost a self-tell, right? That that the moneyed class is not paying the workers enough, but they just fall short of that realization.
Understand. Well, again, Bob, I don't see any more questions. I don't see anybody's hand raised. I want to thank you for an interesting presentation. I'll remember that the hokey pokey is not just a dance anymore.
Yeah. I was happy to talk and had a lot of fun preparing this.